What is up, Much Music? We have an extremely special guest today. The legend Sam Roberts is joining us in studio. Sam, thanks for coming in today.
It's a pleasure. Nice to be back at Much.
Yeah, it's amazing.
It's been much too long.
Exactly. Listen, the fans want to know your new album's coming out, The Adventures of Ben Blank, coming out on October 20th. I think the big question is, who is Ben Blank? Can you give us a bit of insight on who that is, or sort of give fans an idea of what the whole title's about?
Well, it started quite a few years ago, where I was considering, the possibility of creating a sort of alter ego, where I would release music under this name Ben Blank, but not tell anybody that it was me.
Yeah.
Just to see how people would, how they respond to the music, if they would interpret it differently, if it wasn't associated with this person that they might have, familiarity with or history with. I never did that, but the idea stuck. Is sort of like what happens, or what are the possibilities in your life of sort of reinvention at any given moment? It doesn't. You don't have to wait till you're my age. It's something that you can consider anyway at every step of your life. So what happens if I sort of loosen the ties of my own past, my own history, and try to start over again? And this is just a thing that keeps coming back in all the songs that I've written over the years, this idea of reinvention and recreation, and never feeling like you're sort of on this railway track in your life. So I decided to sort of release this record, using that idea of this person who is literally leaving all of that behind, the past, and walking into the future, untethered to their own story.
Yeah. I think people are also interested, and it's interesting you sort of talk about that, like your creative outlook on this, because this is the first album you're putting out post-COVID now, and the last one you guys were finishing as the pandemic was sort of starting, so things shifted online, which we all saw in your Crave documentary. How did things change in terms of this record? Was it a different style of being able to write music and record, now post-COVID, whether it be more in a digital world, or did you sort of follow along the same route that you have been doing your entire career? Like, how did that sort of, like, in terms of the production and songwriting, did things change post-COVID, or?
No, it was more that it went back to what we knew before, which was to, make. Fortunately for us, our last record, we'd finished literally at the deadline. Right as COVID was starting, our record was already in the can, so to speak. So we didn't have to go into too much of that mode of recording remotely, or sending things off to your drummer who lived across town and then finishing it that way, which a lot of people ended up trying to make records that way. Fortunately, we didn't have to do that, but there was this sort of, I don't know, almost a feeling of relief and release, just being able to go back into the studio together and work on these songs. And because the song doesn't necessarily present itself fully right away. You have to kind of uncover what it's trying to be. And that process is the beautiful process of being in a band. It's where sometimes you don't hear something the way it's meant to be heard until, our guitar player is playing it his way, and all of a sudden it starts to unlock something that you didn't hear or see before. So it's so vital to the making of a record that we be there together, working on these songs, trying to get them to, the place that we're hoping to get them to. So, fortunately, we're back in that mode.
Yeah. Does it make a difference being in different locations in terms of just, like, creatively? I know you're a Montreal guy, but a lot of this was recorded in Toronto. In the documentary you saw, there was a lot of wildlife involved just in that whole creative side. Does that make a difference, like being in different locations, changing up the scenery?
Yeah, for sure. It's always been a big part of how we've chosen to make records. We have a lot of beautiful music studios in Montreal and here in Toronto as well, obviously. But the idea of sort of having an adventure be part of the creative process, be part of the story of an album, has always been really important to us. So the one year we went to Australia and made a record there, we made a record in Chicago. We just sort of tried to pick places that we were interested in and that we thought might help bring something out of the music that, maybe just being at home and not that I don't love being at home, but, at home you're still sort of chained to a lot of the routines and things, and you're not able to escape fully into a record. So the idea of traveling, even for us coming here to Toronto, adds that little element of adventure that I think I kind of feel it in the music afterwards.
Speaking of adventure, you guys are going back on tour for the first time, really since COVID in 2024. You're starting in February in your hometown of Montreal. What's that like? Are you excited to get back on the road?
Yeah, I'm excited. You know, we've been playing shows, but it's not the same thing as playing. You know, if you play festival season, for example, and you might play Thursday, Friday, Saturday. That's a busy week. But to play 6 nights a week, which is what you do on tour, that's something we haven't done in a few years now.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's anything can happen.
For sure.
And it's hard to sort of replicate that feeling of diving into the music that deeply, like really to the point where you can't think of anything else. It's just what you eat and sleep and breathe all day, every single day.
Yeah.
So I think we've really missed that as a band. But at the same time, it's like, you know, you got to get psyched up for it because it's a challenge for sure.
Yeah, we're big sports fans here in general. And one thing we always find interesting is because athletes all have a pregame routine, right? And some are super superstitious. Some have, they have to put the right skate on before the left. Do you have a pre-show routine or a pre-tour routine? Anything interesting that you do to get you in that zone?
Well, unlike professional athletes, it usually involves having a couple of drinks before the show. But we treat ourselves a lot like Olympians as in the band. We expect the same kind of rigor and discipline that an Olympic athlete would have. It just goes towards rock and roll, But back in the day, we would put on London Calling by The Clash every single time.
Yeah.
And that would be like our psych up music. Just like when I was a kid playing hockey, it was You Shook Me All Night Long, AC/DC. That was the music that we had in the dressing room every single
Yeah, exactly.
And then you knew that it was game time.
Yeah.
You're putting on your pads and you started to feel, getting into the zone. You started to feel mean, picturing your opponent's face, like what you're going to do to them.
You got to get yourself hyped up. You got to,
So London Calling for us as a band was that thing where it's like, we're going to go
Nice.
on the stage. We're going to just lay waste to everything out there,
Yeah.
And whether you were feeling it before or not, because, like we were saying on tour, some days you're just, it's harder to get psyched up than others.
It's
But
a
when
grind.
that song came on, it was like a switch.
For sure.
It's like, okay, whatever you're feeling before, put that aside. We're going out there now, and we got a job to do.
Go time. And was that always the last song you guys played before you went out?
Yeah.
Nice.
And we'd march, and,
Yeah. It's like a hockey team coming out. Same idea.
Exactly.
Do you have a favorite spot on the road? I know it's tough because even in Canada, everybody always has favorite spots here and there. But
This gets political real
I
fast.
I know.
So let's put hometown. We'll treat it like bands. It's like when you talk about who's your favorite band, it's like you take the Beatles and you put it out of the, at least for me.
Yeah.
It's just not even let's just assume that the Beatles are my favorite band. So let's just assume that Montreal is my favorite.
Okay.
Montreal is like the Beatles of show.
Okay.
For me.
That makes sense.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So now we have a lot of places that we can sort of go to with this, but I think St. John's, Newfoundland was the place that surprised me the most because I'd never spent any time there before. And to this day, my first experience in playing there and the way they celebrate music and the way it's just so much a part of the fabric of how people live and everybody sings, everybody plays, and there's just such a love for it that as a band, when you go to a place like that, you feel like you've sort of found your people, and that just resonated with me. And to this day, it's a place that I love going back to.
Yeah. I know you're sort of talking about the nostalgia of touring, and we talked about the nostalgia of being here at Muchmusic. And what better nostalgia than 20 years of We Were Born in a Flame? It's amazing to think that it's been that long. Do you get nostalgic? Do you think about, your career, and what does that album mean to you in terms of, where you're at this time? Because that was sort of the beginning of things, really.
Well, you and I were talking before we started rolling here about Muchmusic, about part of that nostalgia was growing up watching, our favorite VJs from days gone by broadcasting out of the building next to here, and then dreaming about what it might be like to one day be there yourself and then actually doing it, and as much as you want to celebrate these things and these chapters, and I find it can be it can be hypnotizing and intoxicating to the point where you stop looking forward. So my approach to nostalgia in general is, enjoy and celebrate the things that have happened to you, but don't dwell on it for too long, because it can be so easy to just always be looking backwards and going like, man, those were the best days. And as soon as you sort of fall into that trap, you stop looking to the future. And the future is where the new music is going to happen. Mm-hmm. And if you want that new music to be meaningful to you, then you have to be able to really sort of feel the same desire for it that you did when you were making a record 20 years in the past. Yeah. So yes, for sure, we've celebrated it, but it's been a sort of a sober celebration, so to speak, because the next record is always the most important one.
Yeah, and well, we're at the celebration because you've had an amazing run, and we love looking forward to new music, and we're super excited for the album.
Well, thanks.
And one last question about, sort of looking forward. What's inspiring you today? Are there any artists you look at, the new generation of artists that are coming up? Do you always I know you mentioned you're a big Beatles fan. Is it a lot of the older stuff? In terms of the creative process, what is inspiring you music-wise today?
Oh, I mean, there's so much, and I have 3 kids, so...
Yeah.
Somebody asked me a question, like, who's your favorite band? I said, the Beatles. And they're like, who's your favorite band today? It's like the Beatles and Kendrick Lamar. It's like, I'm starting to get that music sort of coming in through channels that I'm not necessarily dictating.
Yeah.
Like, it's on in the car. And all of a sudden I'm hearing SZA in the car and realizing that I know the words to the song and I don't even know how that happened, And it's just sort of like, you become I've always been a bit of a sponge, for that. And I love the fact that this sort of exposure to something new is not something that I'm necessarily going out and looking for, but it's just all around me all the time. And I just try to keep my ears and eyes open. And all of a sudden you realize that you're thinking about hip hop production in the context of, we're not the first people to do that, obviously, but in the context of making rock and roll music, and I love that. I love sort of feeling like it's a wide open palette,
Yeah. It's amazing to hear, because we're always interested about, what musicians and artists are listening to now, because we're always trying to put ourselves on that same wave. So it's awesome that you're sort of in the new generation and also paying homage to the Beatles and all the older stuff.